Welcome, friends. Welcome back to the kitchen. Welcome back to Sunday morning in the Old Cookbook Show. Today we're going to do a recipe out of this cookbook, the Philadelphia Cookbook, compiled, written by Mrs. Rorer. Mrs. Rorer was, as you may know, a very prolific cookbook and recipe writer in this time period. She owned and ran a number of different cooking schools. She wrote for all of the big corporations that were promoting newish food products in the mid 1800s. So this one was published in 1886, and we're going to do Potato Biscuit number 2. So I'm going to get right to it. It says to pare the potato. So I've pared the potato, I've peeled it. It's in water here right now just to keep it from going brown because I got a whole bunch of things that I'm doing. If I had just put it in a bowl, it would have gone brown. I'm going to put it in this pot. I'm going to put the soaking water in there too. And I'm going to bring that to a boil. I'm supposed to boil them until soft and mash them. Okay, so while that comes to a boil, let's talk about biscuit. What a horrible word. What an absolutely horrible, horrible word is biscuit. Because it means so many different things to so many different people, and the word itself and what it refers to has transformed over time from meaning one thing. There was a time where we all who spoke English were on the same, on the exact same page of what a biscuit was. And then it sort of transforms over time in different places. Some places it now refers to a cookie or something that's sweet, but still sort of thin and crispy. The United States, it refers to a quick bread or a chemically leavened flour thing that looks like a bun, but it's not made with yeast. In this time period, biscuit is used on a number of different recipes that all sort of come to the same point. It's a raised flour bun, but we're in a transformation period here where some biscuits use yeast for that raising, and some biscuits are starting to use chemical leavening like baking soda and baking powder. This 1880s, you go forward a couple of pages and you start to see the quick breads, what we would today call, or what Americans today would call, a biscuit. Okay, let's check the potatoes. And a knife goes in nice and smooth. They are done. So into this mixing jug, I'm going to put some flour. And then I'm supposed to scald it with some of the boiling potato water. And mix that together. Supposed to stir and beat rapidly. Now, does this sound familiar? There is a often attributed Japanese version of this called, is it tangzhong? Anyway, you're gelatinizing the flour. Changes the end result down the line. And we're only doing part of the flour. So this also, from brewing beer, I know that there's also a whole bunch of other things that are going on here right now that aren't going on because I'm talking instead of mixing and I'm letting it get cold. But heat and the starches in the flour, and you're starting an enzymatic action. There's a whole bunch of things going on here. And in the 1800s, did we know? Did humans know exactly what this was, or did we just fall into this and we hadn't quite discovered yet what was actually happening? Okay, I think that's good. Now, I'm going to drain and mash the potatoes. Give them a bit of a mash. Okay, so potatoes are mashed. Just potatoes. There was no salt in that water. There's no butter. There's no milk. There's no seasoning. Potato boiled, mashed. Simple, simple. I put this in and mix it into the flour mixture that we've already got going. I'm also supposed to add salt at this point. If you look away, That's a whole tablespoon of salt. Yes, salt kills yeast. So does sugar. Salt and sugar kill yeast, depending on the proportions. That seems so. Most bread recipes have a salt amount, and the salt acts for a couple of things. It's flavor. Without the salt, there's no flavor. It has to be there for flavor, because if you've ever had bread without salt, you'll know it. It tastes horrible. Or at least to me, it tastes horrible. So the salt amount is based on a percentage. So I'm sure that whoever made this recipe knows that that tablespoon of salt is not going to kill the yeast. Otherwise, it wouldn't have made it into this cookbook. I mean, we could talk about salt in yeasted bread mixtures till the cows come home. I don't want to go down that road. Now, I'm supposed to let this sort of come to room temperature. What does it say? Lukewarm. In the meantime, I'm going to dissolve yeast in a half cup of water. Today's yeast could just be thrown in here once this is lukewarm. It doesn't need to be dissolved. It dissolves quickly, it acts quickly. But in order to keep the liquid component of the recipe square, I'm going to put in the yeast. And it says quarter yeast cake or half a cup of yeast. And when they talk about that half a cup of yeast, this was still in a time period where people kept yeast alive on the back counter, feeding it potato, not sourdough. They didn't allow it to go sour. It's also a time period where you would go to the brewery. You may have been brewing beer in your own basement or out in the barn, who knows? Or you would go to the brewery down the street, and they would be fairly close by. And you could go to them and just get a half a cup of barm, the yeast that they'd scoop off the top of the vat. And you would use that in your baking. Or you would bring that home and you would feed it potato and then just keep scooping it off. And then, maybe once a week or every couple of weeks, you would go back to the brewery and get a little bit more fresh yeast. Okay, I'm going to say about 15 minutes before I come back to that. Okay, so I think our temperature's good, and I'm going to pour our yeast and yeast water in there, and we'll give that a mix. Now that this is mixed together, it tells me to cover and let stand somewhere warm, 72 degrees Fahrenheit until light, and that this could take 4 hours. I'm pretty confident that the baking yeast or the bread yeast that we're using today is much better than the yeast that they would have used in that day. This, in about 2 hours, should be ready to go. So I'm going to put it somewhere warm and we'll leave it for a couple hours. Okay, we've got a pretty good looking sponge going here. Move on to the next section. This is one of those recipes that, you're going to spend a little bit of time throughout the day coming back to it. You don't have to really babysit it as such, but it's one of those things where you have to watch your timing and be able to sort of come back to it, do some things, and then you can move on and do something else. It's a Saturday or Sunday type recipe. Now I'm supposed to scald some milk. 1880s. Milk isn't pasteurized. This is your pasteurizing step. This scalding step, and I've said this a million times before, this scalding step changes... I don't have a spoon rest. This scalding step changes the way that the proteins are tangled in the milk, which will change the eventual outcome of the bun. So we've done like a tangzhong method, probably not saying that right, probably even have the wrong word, but where we cooked or gelatinized part of the flour. We added the potato. Again, that's going to change the texture. We made a sponge, changing the texture. Scalding the milk, changing the texture. I'm expecting big things from these buns. I'm sorry, did I say buns? I meant to say biscuits. Okay, milk is scalded. I'm going to melt some butter in here. Going to turn off the heat and let this come to lukewarm. Okay, I'm going to say that's lukewarm. I'm going to put this into another measuring jug. And then I'm going to add flour to make a batter that drops from a spoon. Let's start with that, see what happens. This is a recipe I should cut in half. It's kind of hard to tell at the start, mostly because it doesn't tell you how much flour, and I usually judge from the flour. So I'm going to say that drops from a spoon. I'm going to move that to a bigger bowl. Now I'm supposed to add the sponge into this, mix it in, cover it, and then let it rise again before I even add more flour to knead and make a dough. So this is going to be a huge amount of biscuits. So in goes our potato, flour, water, and yeast mixture. Mix that in. Now I cover and let rise 2 hours. See you in a couple hours. Okay, let's have a look. Ooh, looking good. Looking good. I wish I'd cut this in half or even quartered it. The next thing I'm supposed to do is add enough flour into this to make a dough and then knead it for 15 minutes. And at the beginning of this section, Mrs. Rorer gives some great information about what's happening in the rest of the section. And she talks about flour. She talks specifically about changes in flour and that there's newer flours coming in the way that they're milled, ground, processed. And that those newer flours will produce more gluten. They will also, you need less of that newer type of flour in order to make your bread. So all of the recipes start changing. And she's trying to deal with that change by letting you know which processes, if you have a flour from this process, you need to do this, that, or the other thing. Talks a bit about yeast and fermentation. But she gives me a challenge. This is not, then, a mere mixture, but an actual chemical combination. But as we cannot use water enough to alone affect this, it must be supplemented by kneading. And here comes our most important point. So far, this has been best accomplished by the hands. All machines made for the purpose that have come under my observation have been failures. Hold my beer. Okay, not available in Mrs. Rorer's time, but it is available in mine, and I'm going to use it. Or I'm going to try to use it. I'm going to see what happens. So, this is light and it's warm. You can feel the fermentation. Let's get it into the mixing bowl. Okay, onto the machine. Dough hook in. So based on Mrs. Rorer's instructions here of how I would have done it in a bowl with my hands, add a little bit of flour, mix it in, add a little bit of flour, mix it in, add a little bit of flour, mix it in, until you get something that is the right consistency. So here's the catch. You pretty much have to know with this method what bread dough is supposed to feel like. Because there are no exact measurements. You're just going by eye. We're going to see how this works out. Right, so I'll just let the dough hook pull that flour into the dough ball. Let's see where we get. Okay, I'm going to do this last bit by hand out here on the counter. So get some flour out on the counter. And we'll get the dough out. Still, it's a little bit sticky. That actually feels really nicely. Okay, so just a little bit of flour. Okay, so we just worked that pretty hard. I'm going to let it rest. I'm going to put a tea towel over it, let it rest, because the next thing I need to do is make into little biscuits and then put them on a pan and allow them to rise again before we bake them. I fear that if I tried to roll this out or flatten it out in order to make biscuits, it would just keep springing back. So I'm going to leave it 15, 20 minutes. Okay, I think that amount of rest is good. Let's roll this out and cut some biscuits. Oh, that's pretty nice. Yeah. So this dough feels really nice. I'm kind of impressed with it. It's rolling out nicely. I didn't need all of this as biscuits, so I've kept a bit. I'm going to stick that in the fridge, and tomorrow, I'll put it in the oven. I'll bring it back up to room temperature, let it rise again. I'll shape it. I'm going to bake it as a loaf of bread. See how that works out. So now, cut them as biscuits. This makes a really big biscuit. So I'm going to cover this and let them rise for about 20 minutes. I'm going to say these have risen reasonably well. They could rise a little bit more, but it's a little bit chilly here in the studio today. My main course is almost ready. Marry My Tuscan Cowboy Chicken. We've got a corn pudding as a side dish ready to go. I've got a carrot cake for after dinner ready to go. It's just time to get these biscuits in the oven. Now, this is not in the recipe, and I'm sure Mrs. Rorer would not argue with me on this point, but I think I'm going to brush the tops of some of these with a little bit of butter and see what happens. Last one, and into the oven. Now it says a quick oven, so I've got this set to 425 and about 20 minutes. Hey, Jules.
Hey, Glenn. Hey, friends.
I give you
buns.
Potato Biscuit number 2.
Oh, no, not buns. Potato Biscuit number 2.
Potato Biscuit number 2. So I brushed half of them with butter before I put them in the oven.
Okay.
I don't remember which half. And at this point, I can't tell.
No, there isn't visually much of a difference between them.
No. So crack one of those open. Let's see what happens.
Oh, those are pretty soft and fluffy. Oh, and even a little still steamy.
Mmm. That's got amazing texture.
It does have a lot of texture.
It's soft and it's...
I'm so going in for the dip, though. Look out.
Marry My Tuscan Cowboy Chicken on the go here. Mm-hmm. Let's give...
They're great for dipping. They do need a little butter. They don't have a lot of flavor to them.
Mmm. Mmm. Dipped in sauce.
Glenn does like...
Okay. So...
Those are good.
Lots of little steps along the way, right? You do something, you go away, you come back. You do something, you go away, you come back. Not something that you're going to do on a weeknight.
No.
It will take you an entire day. Mrs. Rorer says that if you start at 10 o'clock in the morning, they'll be ready for tea time.
Which is 3?
Well, it's 5 after 7. I started this morning at 10.
Yeah, but you're not her.
No, and
Let's face it.
I was doing a bunch of other things. I cooked 4 recipes today, so I was doing a bunch of other things as well. But it's going to take you a bit of time. That hot potato water in the flour step at the beginning, combined with the mashed potatoes, is the key to this bun. We would now call it a dinner roll.
Yes, it has a very, yeah.
We would now call it a dinner roll, but for this, I should have looked. I keep meaning to look at. Every time I leave the studio, I mean to look up this word. I think it's tangzhong. Someone's going to correct me in the comment section. But that method of cooking the flour, gelatinizing the flour with the hot potato water, is huge here. Okay, I saved some of this because I didn't need that many rolls.
That's already more bun rolls.
Than we need.
Biscuits than we need, yeah.
So it's in the fridge, and I will bake it off tomorrow as sandwich bread, because that will make amazing sandwich
little
bread.
mini sandwiches? Oh, they'd be really good little sliders with like some pulled pork or something like that. Yeah, yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so Thanks for stopping by. Definitely give this a try. See you again soon.